one of the things that people said to me when I experienced burnout myself, they said, well, Jenny, didn't you realize that you were working too hard? And I said, well, come on, as a doctor, you sign up knowing that you're going to work horrendous hours. It's going to be hard work. It's going to be challenging work. It's going to be quite stressful work, especially when you're dealing with trauma and people's emotions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You have that expectation that, yeah, it's going to be difficult. And so you just gird your loins and you keep on pushing through.
Well, hello and welcome. Welcome to another episode of the Finding Equilibrium show. Delighted to be here, delighted that you're here, and delighted that my guest today is Jenny Brockis. Now, Jenny is an internationally board-certified lifestyle medicine physician. She works many different workplaces as a workplace health consultant, and she's also the owner and the founder of Brain Fit. So absolutely delighted to have you here, Jenny. Thank you so much for making time. How are you today and where are you today?
I'm really well, thanks, Lawrence. And I'm living in one of the best places on the planet, but don't tell everybody because they'll all want to come and live here too. I live in Perth in West Australia, and it's a divine place to be in.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again for being part of the show. So I'd love to know, I mean, you have a very, very interesting career and a very interesting background. And I'd love to know your journey. How did you get to be doing what you're doing? And then we'll dig into some of those kind of big topics around lifestyle medicine. But first of all, for people who aren't familiar with your work, I'd love you to introduce yourself.
Okay. So my initial training was in medicine. I became a medical practitioner. I trained as a general practitioner and set up my own business here in West Australia and ran a very successful practice for many, many years until I burnt out. And that experience shook me to the core because I never saw it coming. I was in complete denial that anything was wrong. And as a consequence, the process of healing from that, which took 2 years in total, required a lot of introspection, self-reflection, and growth. There's a lot of talk these days about post-traumatic growth, and I strongly believe in this. Some people would get knocked over sideways by adverse events in their life, but I was one of the fortunate few who actually learned a great deal from that experience. Not that I want to wish it on anybody else, because it's horrible. But I learned a lot about myself, and I learned a lot about what I really wanted to do. And it wasn't staying as a general practitioner. And that led me to question my identity, because I'd spent all my sort of life training to become a doctor and then working as a doctor. So what was this going to be like? So it took a little bit of sort of exploration and willingness to step out into the void and create a new career path, which was when I moved into the workplace, helping others to thrive better and to look at how we can create better workplace cultures that support the individual so that the workplace organism, if you like, becomes healthy too. So this is where I sort of deviated into that. And along the way, I retrained in lifestyle medicine because I realized after a couple of years that a lot of what I was talking about, and we all know, I think we all do know, what are the right choices to make to stay healthy, which is, eat right, get enough exercise in your day, make sure you're sleeping, manage your stress, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there's this chasm between what we know and what we do. And I was fascinated by the research coming out of lifestyle medicine, which was actually revealing that in some instances, we were now looking at the possibility of shifting the health paradigm to one that was much more focused on prevention. We are now much more capable of knowing what keeps us well. Yes, we need to have focus on when things go wrong. Of course we do. And we've got lots of therapies and lots of treatments and lots of things in place to do that. But we've missed what I say is the obvious, which is what does it take to keep people fit and healthy? And the issue here, and as a lifestyle medicine physician, I deal with this every single day, is that people will say, well, Jenny, I know all this stuff. And I say, yes, I know you know, but you're not doing. And there's a reason for that. So we need to dig into why our societies have led us down the wrong path or a different path from what our physiology and psychology would show us to be a better path. So that's basically, in a nutshell, why I ended up doing what I do today. And the great thing is, initially I thought I was like somebody shouting on the top of a mountain into the wind and nobody was listening and there was nobody else thinking the same way as I was. And then I discovered that, in fact, there are a whole raft of people like myself, not just doctors, but lots of people in allied health as well, who also have this holistic approach to well-being. Let's look at what keeps people well first, and then seek to mitigate the impact of illness when it occurs, and in some instances, reverse that process. We are getting to the point where we can reverse things like heart disease and type 2 diabetes and all these things that are currently adding to the burden of chronic medical disease across our planet. Mm-hmm. And it just seems the smarter approach. But I'm particularly interested in the humanity side of things. I'm very keen on helping people to understand what they can do as individuals, where they take self-responsibility for their own choices, and then putting that in the context of a supportive environment. Yes. Because you can do so much for yourself, but when everybody else is on the same page, woof, then you start to create magic. Then you start to really bring about societal behavioral change. And let's face it, we're creatures of habit. We like to do the things because we're used to doing them that way. We don't like to be to change.
No, it's fascinating. Thank you for sharing. So it's really interesting that you trained in the kind of classic Western medicine as a GP, and then through your own experience, then became aware and now are trained as a lifestyle medicine physician. Just on that lifestyle medicine, for people who are not familiar with that term, I think we can assume what's included, but how would you define lifestyle medicine?
Lifestyle medicine is really just the choices we make on a daily basis, choices about what we choose to eat at each meal, how we choose to organize our day, what activities we engage with, the people that we interact with, and how we choose to have those conversations or interactions. It's about ensuring that you're conscious of what helps you to function at your best. So if you know, for example, that you do need sleep, but work is very demanding and you've got small children and you've got all these other reasons, like a big hairy dog that likes to share the bed with you and everything else, it's not always, easy or practical. So it's about building the self-awareness of what's most important to you as an individual, and then being consistent in the choices that you make. It's not about perfection. I get a bit irritated by some of the wellness gurus who say, follow my 7-step plan and you'll be fit, fabulous forever. Life's not like that. We've got to be a bit kinder and a bit more compassionate to ourselves and do the best we can. Mm-hmm. And I think if we're doing that, that's great. So if you're going to have pizza once a week, go and have pizza once a week and enjoy it, but maybe not choose to have pizza every night of the week. So it's just little things like that that we can do that enhance our own well-being. So I'm sure, Lawrence, the difference between those days where you feel on top of the world, healthy, you've got great mood and everything's just falling into place. It's great, but not every day is like that. And we just need to be able to balance it out a little bit better if we recognize which obstacles do get in our way of enjoying more of the good days.
Yes. No, I love that, and completely aligned with the whole philosophy of this podcast. So one question that comes to mind immediately is something you said earlier, that lifestyle medicine, we all know, or most of us know, that what we eat, whether we move our bodies, sleep, social relationships, the work that we do are very important contributors to our well-being, how we actually feel on a daily basis. But you also said that even though people know this, they don't actually do this. And I'd love to understand what gets in the way in the work that you do, working with so many different people. Like, what are the obstacles? What prevents people from really, I guess, taking responsibility for their own lifestyle, well, their own well-being, you know, ultimately. And I like what you say is about balance. And I think maybe that's one thing that gets in the way, is we think it has to be all or nothing. And it's like, so in the end, we just, you know, go with what we like doing, even though those things might actually have, you know, very negative consequences for us in the short, medium, or long term.
I think probably one of the biggest obstacles that we face, and this is particularly leaders, the leaders that I've spoken with and worked with, is that they are super passionate about what they do. They've got a job to do that they're absolutely aligned to, and they want the very best for the company, for their staff, for their teams, and they give it absolutely everything they've got. And as a consequence, the rest of their life sort of is put on the sidelines. They don't have the time for the family and the children as much as they would like to. So they've got this conflict that's pulling them in different directions, but they're never satisfied. When they're at work, they're feeling guilty about not being with the family. When they're in the family, they're feeling guilty that they should be doing more work. And so they've got this sort of push me, pull you situation that they're unable to resolve, because they want to be seen as good leaders. They want to be seen as available, making sure that everybody's being looked after and they're navigating the business safely through whatever they're navigating through. But we've got to do that in the context of knowing what our boundaries are. And I think the biggest issue for many of us around lifestyle is we don't prioritize lifestyle as much as we do the business side of things. So if we've got that mismatch of values, if you like, then you've got an issue. So I think the biggest thing that it's giving ourselves permission to make sure that we bring the best version to ourselves to whatever we're doing on a daily basis in a consistent and self-sustaining way. So I don't know what you like to do in terms of exercise, Lawrence, what floats your boat. Some people like to go to the gym, some people like to go for a run, some people like just to go for a walk around the block in the evening. Doesn't matter, but it's identifying what your choice is, and you know that is manageable and sustainable mostly, because there's always going to be those times when it's not going to happen, and that's okay. But it overall, it adds to this sort of cumulative effect that it builds our, you know, that people are always talking about resilience these days, which is another topic we could talk about at length, because I think we've got resilience all wrong too. I think it does help us to deal with adversity and challenge much more easily when we're in a better state physically and mentally, because we can handle the extra stress more readily. We're not sort of at that tipping point where it's just one last thing and then bloof, it all goes to custard.
So it's almost like, as a leader, and let's kind of talk about leaders for a moment, because leaders, particularly leaders of people, you know, people are leading a department or a whole business, everybody's responsibility or everyone's problem is their problem. And often, and I see that a lot, they're deprioritizing their own needs and putting everyone else, and then eventually they're at risk of burnout. And I know this is this is a massive topic and a massive problem for many organizations. But what I hear you say is that if we've got to almost make these lifestyle habits non-negotiable, because if we do, then we're setting ourselves up for success. You know, the exercise or the food, you know, because often we're eating for convenience, you know, at the end of at the end of the day, and of course all of that is back to front. And I guess when you do step back, you do recognize the risk that we're actually creating for ourselves. And so, you know, by actually prioritizing the self-care, if I use that word, then you are of course helping yourself become a better leader, a better person, and you're actually going to be there for the team and for the business.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, that's cool. What's your view? Because one thing that strikes me is sometimes our whole system is set up incorrectly, and it feels in many ways that we're almost going through a bit of a paradigm shift. You know, like the old kind of world was very much about, you know, it's all about work, work, work. And, you know, if you're kind of taking time off for yourself, then this can be frowned upon. And that's certainly the environment that I grew up in, you know, over many years. Whereas now, and we hear this through our Wellbeing at Work conferences and summit, you know, now there's a big shift that's happening. It's like the whole paradigm. So there feels like there needs to be a lot of unlearning that needs to take place, because people have been programmed to behave in one particular way as a leader, and now we're saying, well, actually that's no longer appropriate. Maybe it wasn't appropriate in the first place because it's led us to where we are now, which you know, where we're facing, you know, many challenges. So, but I love your view in terms of the way things are set up, because we have a system that perhaps values convenience and some of those other things, and doesn't necessarily value preventative care in the way you're describing. So that's where there's a kind of conflict, if you like. And I think it's shifting, but as we know, it takes a long time for it to shift properly.
It's shifting very, very slowly. Very slowly. When we look at sort of the health budget, for example, we know that only 3% of the health budget currently goes towards prevention.
Really?
Which is nuts. So it is an imbalance of resources. I mean, obviously we need resources where they're required, but it's a bit like, you know, you're in a river and all these people are floating down the river drowning. And so you're down the end of the river, picking them out of the water, trying to resuscitate them. And nobody's going into the place where they're all falling in because the bridge is broken and there's nothing to stop them from falling in. So that's why I think
I
we
love
need to
that.
shift.
Yeah, we need to build the bridge. Yeah, we need to build the bridge.
And I think you're right in that we have created this system, particularly around the workplace, which is now changing slowly, built on previous thinking, which was in order to be productive, you had to do so many hours. And the idea of success came from doing more than everybody else, because you had to sort of demonstrate your competency and your capacity to be the best at everything. And that sort of went in the face of, well, I would call it common sense, but I can't actually say that to too many CEOs. They might not like it. But we know from the research, the scientific evidence is that we are built from a physiological and psychological point of view to operate probably for no more than 6 hours a day at this place we call work. But how many hours do most people spend at work? Much more than that, I would suggest. It's been very interesting watching the outcomes of the pilot trials of the 4-day working week, which has been very strong, I know, in the UK. We're doing it here in Australia and around the world as well. And the proponents are saying, well, this is great. I'm getting paid the same amount of money, I'm doing the same amount of work, but I'm doing it in a shorter space of time and being more effective and more efficient. But the big bonus is that people are actually getting more downtime to rest and restore. And I think this is the piece that's been missing in the workplace for too long. The expectation was, well, you know, unless you're working a 60-hour week, you're really not contributing enough. So yes, get on with it.
You're a slacker. And yes.
You're a slacker. You want to leave early? It's only 6:30. Okay. So it is changing this mindset. And it has to be led from the top, because if you're somebody that's sitting in the office thinking, well, how much longer is he going to be sitting in his office before I can go home? Then you're setting everybody up to sort of get overtired or exhausted, and greater risk of stress-related illness, burnout, and all those mental health challenges that we know are too rife in the workplace today.
How big a challenge is that? Like, we talk about burnout, mental health challenges, and I know there's a lot of resources, but for people listening to this, just to put some context on that. I hear this all the time, that burnout is the biggest risk. You know, I had one large organization saying that burnout is their biggest risk, you know, particularly for leaders and for managers. But in the work that you do, do you see that? Is that would you agree with that hypothesis that burnout is the biggest risk?
I think it is, because it all ties into expectation of ourselves and the others, and the expectation others place on us as well. So I think it's about addressing that level of expectation. How much is enough? I think we've lost sight of how much is enough. If you're somebody who's passionate and driven and loves what you do, the biggest risk is that you have got no idea of what enough is, and you will keep going regardless. And we now know from the research that it is the overextended and exhausted person who is at highest risk of burning out,
really?
Because you can't see the stop signs. And you've got this inner drive. It's compelling you to keep going. One of the things that people said to me when I experienced burnout myself, they said, well, Jenny, didn't you realize that you were working too hard? And I said, well, come on, you know, as a doctor, you sign up knowing that you're going to work horrendous hours. It's going to be hard work. It's going to be challenging work. It's going to be quite stressful work, especially when you're dealing with trauma and people's emotions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You have that expectation that, yeah, it's going to be difficult. And so you just gird your loins and you keep on pushing through. And so what I'm seeing in the companies that are doing this well is that they are adopting an approach of treating burnout prevention as a top business priority, along with promoting health and well-being. And this requires a strategy to be put in place. Burnout prevention, just like bushfire prevention. I mean, we're living in a time of climate change. We know how dangerous bushfires are. And so, you know, the warnings go out early in the piece in the Australian summer. So make sure that you're prepared and what to do and where's your nearest exit route. We need to be thinking about the same thing in terms of the workplace safety. So this relates to burnout and to mental health well-being, and obviously to psychological safety as well, which is, of course, the big issue that many companies are now trying to sort of grapple and understand. And what does this all mean to me as an organization? And what does it mean to me as an individual? Because until we've got that understanding, we're all sort of floating around and in the dark.
What are you seeing then in terms of best practices from both at an organizational level and an individual level? You know, one question that comes to mind, and I'll ask this, given your experience, your life experience, you know, you trained as a GP, and as you said, you sign up for a GP to be a GP, and GP, it's a bit like law. You know, we do a lot of work with lawyers. It's like you sign up for a lawyer, for being a lawyer, and well-being might not be the reason you go into that kind of career. But given you've gone through this, you've had that burnout experience, and now you've come through the other side and you've retrained, and you're now doing the work that you do, and you're much more aware of prevention and waving the flag to really get the resources rebalanced. But what advice would you give to your younger self? So if you came into to see you like now, and you were still a GP, and this was pre-burnout, what would you say to that person? You know, given you signed up, and you know what you just said, really, the highest risk group are the people who are passionate, and, you know, they kind of all or nothing, they're going to throw themselves in. And I'd love to, you know, it's one of those kind of classic coaching questions, but I'd love to see like what you would say to yourself to prevent the burnout from happening.
I would say to myself, go home, Jenny. You've done enough. You've done enough. Go home and re-establish the boundaries that you have around work and other aspects of your life. I would suggest that I took a big, long look at what really mattered the most to me. Because I know when things go wrong, when we go through difficult times, whether it's burnout or we're dealing with anxiety or depression, or we've lost somebody that we love, the thing that gives us the most strength during those times is our relationships with other people. And I firmly believe that if we have the support and love of other people around us, we can get through pretty much anything. I mean, we've just lived through a global pandemic. And I think that was very much highlighted. I mean, lockdown was terrible for so many reasons, but the principal reason it was so terrible was it created this barrier between ourselves as individuals and the people around us, whether they were our neighbors, whether our family or our work colleagues, whoever, because we are social creatures. And our health and well-being is so dependent on our ability to have connection with other people. So apart from boundaries, which I think sometimes get broken and we overextend ourselves by working too many hours, staying late, et cetera, is we let those connections wither or diminish in some way. We almost treat them as if they're not as important, whereas in fact, they're terribly important. And this is true for all our personal relationships and the relationships we have in other aspects of our lives, whether it's, with social groups or in the workplace. And I think if we can get better at understanding the need we have as humans to connect with other people, so we get this sense of belonging, that somebody actually, I won't swear, but cares for us, gives a damn, then we feel so much better. Then we can actually manage what's happening in our world at this particular point in time.
Now that makes a lot of sense. So having boundaries in place, so kind of recognizing that even though you signed up as a GP, for example, there has to be an end. You can't just keep going because it's never ending. There's always going to be more people that need your help. So you have to have those boundaries. And you can see that in many of the caring industries that, the job never ends because there's always someone else that needs help. So you can see how people who are very heartfelt kind of people can easily be at risk of burnout. And I take your point about the importance of connection. I think we've all learned that because connection and social relationships, often you can take that for granted. It's only when something occurs like we've been through that you realize, well, actually, this is such an important component of well-being. And I guess what struck me is workplaces are really communities of people and that connection. And we're hearing that a lot from organizations who are, now trying to encourage employees to come back into the office and spend time. And what we're hearing is it's not to do the work, because we know we can actually do the work from anywhere. I think we've all learned that now. Yes. But the reason we go into the workplace and what we're hearing from the leading companies is to connect with others. That kind of social well-being is such an important component. So completely agree with that. What about the organizational level? Like, what are you seeing in terms of best practices from organizations who are really trying to, because I guess my own view and what we're hearing through the research is that true well-being is really a partnership. The individual takes responsibility. Let's call it self-leadership, if you like. There's a lot of things that we can do, as you've described. We can decide what we feed our body. We can decide if we want to go for a run or do exercise. We can decide whether we go to bed at 10 p.m. or 3 a.m. It's our choice, and we can decide who we talk to or who we don't. So there's a lot of things that are within the control of the individual. But when we're part of an organization and we feel that kind of sense of belonging around that, there is a responsibility on the leaders to create an environment that almost supports well-being of the people. And I'd love to hear from you any examples of really, good practice that you're seeing, in any industry through the work that you're doing.
I think one particular organization comes to mind. And what they've done is they've looked at the topic of what does well-being mean to us as an organization. And they've realized that it's an umbrella and that there's so many different facets of what contribute to well-being. And they're all of equal importance, but they're not always, because it's a dynamic process. Sometimes certain aspects of well-being will need to be addressed or improved on at a particular time. And so what they seem to have done well is they have set up a system within the system, if you like, where people are invited to share in a safe environment, and this is of course where psychological safety is so critical, to speak up and share, what are their challenges, what areas do they see needing a little bit more TLC, and from that they then take action. And I think the biggest thing about the organizations that are doing it well, they're not just listening, because yes, we do need to listen in order to bring about any change. But having listened, they're then reflecting back what they've heard and then putting in place something that is tangible, that can be seen and experienced as an action to bring about a positive change, whether that's in some aspect of job design or whether it's a particular process that's being followed and maybe needs updating. And then reviewing the whole situation on a regular basis. Now, whether you do this as a quarterly thing or a 6-monthly thing or an annual thing, it depends on the particular organization. And I think the thing about workplace health and well-being is that every workplace is unique in the same way as we are as individuals are unique. So there is no one size fits all. And I think the organizations that are doing it well have understood what's relevant to their particular situation and are working with it.
Yes.
And I think what's really heartening is that word gets out. And it's a social proof when people say, hey, what's going on with you? Because, everybody seems happy. Everybody seems, to be enjoying what they're doing. And then that piques people's curiosity as to what they're doing differently. And that's how we can spread the ideas around a holistic approach to health and well-being, which incorporates the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the social aspects of what keeps us whole as human beings.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. So it's almost like a sequence, isn't it? So kind of listen to your people, understand what's really going on for them. Don't make assumptions that reflect back so that you make sure that you've got it right. And then of course take action, and then of course reflect and review that the action is actually achieving the outcomes that you want. I really love that. Last question really around organizational well-being. I've heard you say about this quest to improve the level of humanity at work. And I'd love you to kind of expand on that. Like, what does, if we achieve that, for example, like what does that look like? Like if we closed, someone once described this as like the magic question. If we all closed our eyes and we imagined that suddenly we've arrived in a world where the level of humanity is balanced, let's say, and we've achieved that quest, what does it look like to you?
It's a big question, isn't it? How long have we got to talk about it? I think it boils down to something as simple as kindness. Kindness towards ourselves and being kind towards others. Seeing people as other people. And we're so good at judging, making assumptions, getting it wrong completely sometimes. I think the quest is to remember that we're all doing the best we can at the moment, and to show ourselves some kindness and compassion, and to show it to others as well. I think that would be my quest.
I love that.
That we all treat each other well.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it actually with that answer, to be honest, because that's kind of what you see, and I think really we're coming through that kind of paradigm shift. And I was thinking about this the other day, like we call it human resources, which kind of indicate that people are resources. We become very focused at measuring and numbers, which are very important, but you forget that behind every number is a person, and each of those people have got whole lives. And the more sensitive we are to those whole lives, and the more we can connect with them at an emotional level, recognizing that everyone's different, then that becomes a human-centered workplace. So I really love that. So very last question, which I ask all of my guests. This podcast, this show is called the Finding Equilibrium Show, because it's all about balance. We recognize that life is not black and white. It's not about good and bad. It's about finding the balance in every aspect of life and not aiming for perfection, because that never comes. But when I ask you, what does finding equilibrium mean to you? I'd love your reaction. And then the second part of the question is, you're clearly an expert. You've been on your own life journey. You've trained in lifestyle medicine, and I'm assuming you have some really good habits that keep yourself in balance, because you're doing, you have a busy life as well. And I'd love you to share some of the things that you personally do to keep yourself in balance every day.
Equilibrium. Equilibrium is a state, really. It's about understanding that who you are, what you stand for, and what you value has to sort of all coalesce. And I think for me, equilibrium was learning that I didn't have to follow other people's paths that they expected of me to follow, and that I was able to create my own path. So for me, equilibrium was about determining what path was best suited for my particular circumstance. And that meant letting go of perfectionism, letting go of being this high achiever who always had to work harder than everybody else in order to prove her self-worth. It's always a work in progress, these things. and to enjoy more of what the marvelous world has to offer us, because I realized that I had been missing out on the beauty of what was around me, but I was blinded to it because I was so focused on work, and nothing but work. So for me, equilibrium today is about ensuring that I have time for self. And I'm not talking about going to get manicures and all this sort of stuff. I'm talking about self. I'm quite an introverted person, and I need time to be alone so I can think and reflect on things. But I also like being with people. So I've got to get that balance right. For me, equilibrium is about spending time in nature. I've come to understand how important being outside is for me personally. And it doesn't really matter what the weather's like. If it's sunshine, fantastic. If it's raining, well, just put a raincoat on, etc., etc. It's about understanding that that's what feeds my soul, allows me to maintain my mental well-being, because it releases all those feel-good hormones that I depend on to stay feeling buoyant and more optimistic and forward, future focused, etc., etc., etc. So on a daily basis, I don't leap out of bed thinking, oh, what's my equilibrium going to be today? It's about, I've created a sense of better understanding when I need to step back because I've been doing too much. Because, if you're a workaholic, you always tend to get sucked in and start doing too much. So it's about recognizing when that's happening and knowing when it's time to rebalance yourself, Jenny. Do that extra thing that is going to make you feel better, whatever that looks like, whether it's a walk down the park or just time to sit down and read a book. I realized that for years I had not given myself permission to do any of these things because I was so caught up in the idea, well, I'm a grown-up now, I'm a professional woman, I've got to do this in this order, and that's the way it is. It's rubbish, absolute rubbish.
It's funny.
The good thing about finding equilibrium is it makes you happier. It's less stressful. There's far less anxiety tied into what happens over a different day. And so I'm much more forgiving of myself and of others as a consequence, I think.
That's wonderful. And what a word or a term that came to mind when I heard you speak is this kind of ability to self-regulate. Because if you can if you know when you're out of balance in the moment, and then of course you don't kind of keep going with the task, but you go into nature, and that helps you rebalance and come back. Those kind of tiny shifts help you maintain that sense of well-being rather than kind of pushing through, pushing. And then of course you end up getting sick, and when we're sick, then of course it takes a lot of energy to get back into balance. Wonderful. Jenny, thank you so much. I feel we must come back for part 2 because there's many more questions I'd love to ask you. But let me just acknowledge you and the work that you've done and the work that you continue to do. Where can people find out more about you and about BrainFit and get in touch? I'd love you to share.
Easiest way is via my website, which is Dr Jenny Brockis, all one word, lowercase.com. But I'm on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I love to connect with people on there and to create a relationship or connection where we can talk about stuff. That's what I love.
Wonderful. Yes. I will put those links in the notes below. But for now, Jenny, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I really appreciate you coming on and for sharing. And thank you, everyone, for your time and for your attention. And we will see you soon. Take care now. Have a good day.